ever doing one together, really.
Yeah, so it's funny. Like he's in DC, I'm in New York, so we do every single one of these virtual. All right, let's get into it. Elevation Nation. I'm going to keep it up because I have a tradition now, just saying you got to be excited for this guest. This is someone I've known for a very long time, a Boys Latin alumni, a lifer, actually, and someone who we just reconnected with and hearing about all the things that he's up to. I've been following him on social media, and he's doing a lot of things. And we're going to talk about a lot of things with our guest tonight. Tyler Steinhardt, welcome to Elevation Nation. We are pumped to chat with you.
I'm pumped to chat today and to elevate the conversation.
It's going to be great. Tyler, we're new fast friends, but Parker has been talking you up. He's like, Panitch, you're going to love this guy, Tyler. He's exactly like you. He was involved in everything growing up. He's in 1,000 things. You guys are going to hit it off. So expectations are high that we're going to become friends after this thing. I'm excited to spend 45 minutes to an hour with you, man, getting into your story and who you are. Appreciate you giving us the time. And we have so many connections to other elevators that are part of our nation, part of our family, right? You're roommates with RJ Kaminsky, who's one of our elevators, a favorite. You're also on the board with two other elevators, with Billy Wingo and Devin Harvin with Beneficial Pain. So the connections seem to be endless. It's only natural that you join Elevation Nation, and we welcome you to the community. So thank you for joining us, my friend.
Appreciate that. Excited to chat today.
All right, Tyler, it wouldn't be Elevation Nation without a good elevator pitch. So, you know, obviously Sam and I know a little bit about you, but for Elevation Nation, who are you?
Name's Tyler Steinhardt. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I've had a few different lives, I would say. One sort of being in the nonprofit space, the second being in the lacrosse and sports space, and then third now in climate. But I'm really passionate about the power of media and storytelling to affect positive change, and I've been working at that intersection since I was 16, 17 years old.
It's cool when you are able to, I guess, cross some passions together into forming almost a mega passion, right? So, I mean, I didn't know I liked podcasting. I never did it as a kid, but I do like talking, if you couldn't tell. And so I guess that's one passion. And then the other one of meeting new people. And so there's this beautiful thing. We actually dropped a podcast this week with TikTok star Jimmy Sotos, and he has tattooed on his wrist, Tyler, passion and purpose. And I think when you can find the intersection of those two things, which it sounds like you have, really magical things happen. Have you ever thought about that concept of like passion and purpose and how that ties to your new mission with Pique?
Yeah, I think like for me, passion always kind of rooted back to the sport of lacrosse when I was younger. I think it's probably the best place to start is, I used lacrosse to get me to travel to Uganda. I helped coach the Uganda national lacrosse team. I had started another nonprofit called Shootout for Soldiers around it. It led me to two other jobs, my career. And so that was sort of my passion. I think like similar to passion, there's a curiosity bit. And I always tell friends and family that I just sort of chasing my curiosity. And wherever that kind of goes next. And sometimes that means ADD. And one thing I'm interested in now, I'll forget about in 3 months. And sometimes that means obsessive compulsive stuff for years to go. But for me, really on, it was trying to find something I really enjoyed and I felt would also, have strong impact. And so my real story kind of starts when I was 16. I traveled with a small organization called Fields of Growth to Uganda. They were running sort of like kind of a 2-week program of sorts where you got to sort of coach lacrosse and travel and tour and meet people. I just loved it. I had a lot of fun, and it really sparked a lot of interest and personal passions for me. But the most fun I had was coaching lacrosse. And by accident, they had me coaching a team, one of the 4 teams that was playing at the time. And Uganda had no lacrosse at the time. This was the first time they were having games. And here I am, 16, coaching guys in their mid-20s. And we came in second, I think, in the first sort of like Uganda National Lacrosse Championships. The team called Onionta, which I thought at the time was a Ugandan word. Turns out that's just a state school in New York. It's someone a year before I'd come and given everyone Onionta gear. They sort of loved the name. And that led me to working in this group called Fields of Growth. I worked with them for 3 or 4 years after that. I came back to Uganda a handful of times. I lived in Uganda for a summer. I dropped out of school and college when I was a sophomore. to work in the organization, sort of doing tourist trips, and then ended up coaching the Uganda national lacrosse team, really the GM of the team in 2014 for the World Games. And so for me, passion was core to who I was, and it started there with lacrosse bringing me to this small East African country known as the Pearl of Africa.
I think it's so interesting the way you just like describe that. I mean, like we ask a lot of people on the podcast, like, what do you want to be what did you want to be when you grew up? And was it like you always had lacrosse in the back of your mind? Did you always have giving back to some sort of community, bringing people together in the back of your mind? Or was there something else? And you just found your way, going
I think lacrosse was just what was accessible to me. And so like that's what I grew up with. First of all, being a Baltimore, lacrosse is so important. And it's so tied to things. I played the sport growing up. And so it just came second nature that I was always had a stick in my hand that became great. And so Fields of Growth and Uganda Lacrosse led me to starting Shootout for Soldiers when I was a senior in high school, and I ran this organization for 7 years after that, and still around today. It's had its 10th anniversary. I can touch on that as well. And it wasn't necessarily like, hey, I want to do this. It was like I kept doing things, and some things worked out really well, and some things flopped. I mean, there's tons of things I did that led to nowhere, but with lacrosse stuff, it just sort of kept working, and it kept falling into each other.
Dude, I remember you were 2 years older than me at Boys Lad. I remember you were involved in like every single thing, like every club. You're on student government. You're doing, Shootout for Soldiers. You're doing Uganda Lacrosse. You're supporting the lacrosse team. This just all over the place. I'm like, how are you even managing this as like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old? It's just, I look back at it now. I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was just sort of chasing that curiosity. If I was interested in something, I would do it. And to my parents' credit, they would let me do that. Probably the weirdest sort of like curiosity or trend I had is there was a thing called the Book Thing next to Hopkins. It's just this giant warehouse that has books, and they're all free. I mean, it's probably like 40,000 books or so. And this guy runs it. It's only on Saturdays and Sundays it's open, and you can come and take as much as you want. And when I was in high school, I was obsessed with this like sub-literature of books talking about George Bush's presidency. I thought it was just hilarious, sort of like in a satirical way. And maybe I collected, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 books. Like it was absurd. I had books piling up to my ceiling. My parents have a whole library off of it, and there was a good 70 to 80 books there about George Bush and his presidency, junior, that is, obviously.
Wait, you just walked in and just took all you would walk in, you just take the books home, then you don't have to bring them back, is what you're saying?
Yeah, you can look it up. It's called the Book Thing. And people would donate books. Like it would be estate sales, people no longer reading it. It'd be they're moving and they're getting rid of it. It'd be schools are getting rid of their books and they kind of donate it. And so I collected so much. I had this huge thing. And for me, really, it was always the curiosity. And if you open up a Book Thing book, I'm not sure if any I have here are Book Thing books. It doesn't look like it. But the inside it says like property of the Book Thing, you can't resell this, basically was the only thing. And I would go, it opens up at 9 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday, and I would wait in line at like 8:45. I would get these things. The real thing I also collected was Nat Geos. I have every Nat Geo from like 1928 or something like that to 2015, 16. Like the old school ones my parents have too. So there's tons I was involved with, but I think it's just chasing my curiosity was always the running theme.
So this concept of becoming obsessed with something, in your case, Nat Geo, George Bush books, lacrosse, giving back, we hear this a lot, and that's what's really interesting. So with all the elevators that we interview and talk to, Tyler, that we welcome to our community, Parker and I, right, after naturally having a conversation with them for an hour, we start to find common themes. And one of them is this obsession with curiosity and learning more, even sometimes on very obscure, random topics. And what's cool about that I've found is this concept of an elevator, right? These people that we have in our community are always looking to do a little bit more, learn a little bit more, grow a little bit more, push the community around them to be a little bit better. And that comes in so many different forms. And why it's so cool for me to hear you and some of your different passions is that is the whole reason why we do Elevation Nation around this concept of an elevator mindset and not a business podcast or a sports podcast or whatever. Because, my passion when I was growing up was hoops. all I talked about was hoops. I love basketball, right? I'm now 5'9", maybe, and hoops isn't the number one thing anymore. I like cooking. I like all these other different things, records, music, right? And so as we get older, I feel like we find different places to put our passion of elevating and learning and growing and curiosity. And it sounds like for you, that kind of happened at a really young age of just like being super passionate about many different things and like trying to get the most out of your life. Is that true?
That's spot on. I think like, maybe there was the one small regret I'd have is I was always trying to, especially when I was younger, prepping myself for college. And it was getting good grades to get into a better university or whatever. And it was about performance more than it was about learning. And I think that there were some things here and there that I missed along the way. Now that I have sort of like that perspective now, I'm kind of like, oh, I don't want to be chasing that. I'm doing things I really enjoy. There's a saying, I have like life rules and I've changed them over the years, but like the number 2 life rule I've had for a while is nothing in moderation, which is, I think, counter to what people say. They always tell you to find balance, yada, yada. And I think that that's great in the macro, but in the micro, I think it's totally okay that if you want to spend 4 days hanging out with your buddies and going on a camping trip to do so, and if you want to spend 3 days building out some giant spreadsheet of like your plans for a business or outreach list to do that. And so I let myself go in those sort of like tunnels and valleys, peaks and valleys. And so I think like that's how I kind of approach it. But my regret when I was younger is just trying to do things for performance and not necessarily sort of chasing things that just always meant so much to me.
Do you ever feel that like burden of pressure that like when you try to elevate and do more and make a difference and then you do something like I remember Shootout for Soldiers, for example, you're 16, 17-year-old guy. You put this entire fundraiser together, you organize the whole thing. You're working with sponsorships, adults, young people, everything. You're bringing together a community. You're raising a ton of money for charity and then it's done. And then it's almost like there's an expectation for you. And then the thing that's worse is I feel like as an elevator, for me personally, is like I put this expectation on myself. And then as I continue to go forward in whatever I do, it's like, wow, I got to make sure. No, I just got to make sure that I hopefully live up to that expectation. Has there ever been a challenge for you, Tyler?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I don't know, like Shootout for Soldiers is a prime example. Like what it is, for some context, it was a 24-hour lacrosse event benefiting wounded veterans. And I started when I was a high school senior. I watched like a 60-minute doc with a bunch of friends. And we were like veterans coming home from war. And they're unemployed, underemployed, having mental health issues. A lot of people are familiar with 22 veterans a day, or committing suicide, all sorts of issues. And we kind of felt like, hey, let's do something about this. And what do we know? We knew lacrosse. And so we did a fundraiser. And the idea of 24 hours, just sort of like a stunt gimmick to sort of like make the longest cross game ever. At the time, we were trying to break the Guinness Book of World Records. As an aside, breaking a Guinness Book of World Records at the time required like you to verify it and bring someone there and you to pay money for it. So we didn't really do all that kind of stuff, but at the time, it was the longest game ever. And it was just to do it once. There was no plans to build some giant nonprofit, right? And so we did it once, and it was probably the worst run event you could possibly imagine. I had people like applying via Google Forms. There was no way to prove that they had paid. They got jerseys, but had to return the jerseys to people, so we were watching them. It was just like a complete shit show in so many ways. But when you zoom out nowadays, 10 years later, it's like, this is amazing. Like, it raised $100,000. I think that like the pressure, for me, it's not always just going from 0 to 1, but how do I go from 1 to 100 and beyond? And where I try to push myself is I'm really good at making things or creating things, but I'm not good at building a foundation or policies or helping grow people or scaling an organization. And so the pressure that challenged me at Shootout for Soldiers was, how do I take this one event and make it 5 events and 12 events and build stability towards things? And it's less flashy and it's less glamorous, but I think that's where I was trying to elevate myself, to kind of use your terminology, was where I was trying to get better. And I'm still trying to get better at that today too. So I think I feel that pressure all the time, but to me, it's about trying to tame down some of my base instincts to always start anew and to like challenge myself where things are a little more uncomfortable.
Parker and I talk all the time about that concept of pressure and how we think it's kind of a blessing and a curse of we have this mindset, this elevator mindset, which you obviously have, of wanting to just do a lot, right, and have impact. And you could have, Tyler, I'm sure, taken a very normal corporate job and have been crushing it, right? You did not need to start Shootout for Soldiers. You probably would have gotten into a good school and you would have been fine. But you had that mindset of always doing more. And that's why we call it a blessing and a curse. And I have to remind myself sometimes, right, when Parker and I are putting pressure on ourselves with Elevation Nation or some of the other things we do outside of work, that, like, it's okay if you're not going as fast as you thought you would, or it's okay if we didn't hit that goal yet. It's going to come with time. And again, like, to have that tenacity to elevate and do more is great, but it sometimes sucks when you don't get there and you feel like you failed yourself a little bit. So I appreciate that kind of mentality as well of you talking a little bit about the pressures that you were facing, you know?
So, like, also the reality for me is, like, I kind of started on third base in life. I have good parents. I grew up in a good family. I was together.
Yeah,
like, I was raised in a pretty wealthy family. Went to private school. I'm healthy. It's sort of like sickle thing. I'm a white man. It's straight. Like, there are a lot of things I think I've going for me in a pretty easy way. And so I think that the pressure sometimes is like, if you don't succeed when you have all the cards in the deck, like, what are you doing? And so maybe it's a little bit there, but I don't know. I'm not sure I feel like pressure or that kind of stuff. It's just like recognizing sometimes the privilege you have and being mindful of it, because I think all of us suffer from self-pity sometimes, and when you just sort of reground yourself that, like, hey, here's what everyone else is sort of facing, sometimes you got it pretty good, or at least I have it pretty good, so it's good to remind myself of that too.
Yeah, totally.
So I want to move the conversation along. I know we've been talking a lot about, like, Tyler before you even got to college. Okay, let's skip college a little bit. You know, Sam and I talk a lot about just young adulthood in general, graduating college, joining the real world, getting thrown into the thick of it. And it's really a challenging transition because a lot of people, or I should say most people, have no idea what to expect. Tyler, can you talk a little bit about that transition that you went through from college and, you know, maybe the job that you took and you know, where you went in terms of your city? I know you've done a lot of stuff since then, but we'll get to where we are now.
Yeah, I went to college in DC, and I thought after school, I studied international relations. I was like, you know what? Shootout for Soldiers is going well. I want to double down on this, and I want to build this organization out and take a shot at entrepreneurship. And at the time, I had this 28-foot Dutchman Express RV that I had bought in 2015 that I was traveling around the country in. And so I thought, my plan is to live out of this RV. I wanted to travel the South and go to college football games, run this business I was building and live that life. Now, those are great plans. In August of 2016, I'm driving the RV from Denver to California. It's 6 of us in there, and it's an old RV, man. It's 1992. It's got 100,000 miles on it, and it's going real slow up the mountains in Utah. And I pull over to the side, and I had a guy with me, Ryan O'Neill, who I'd hired, and he was a good friend of mine, who's like in his mid-30s, had done 2 tours in Iraq, and he kind of gets out with me, helps look underneath the RV to see what's going on, and he just shouts, like, everybody get out. We all jump out of this RV and, like, basically run down the street, and 45 seconds later, this entire thing blew up, burned down, completely on the side of the road on the highway, on the ground. Everything we had owned was in there, phone, laptop, clothes, wallets, you kind of name it. And we watched this RV that we had all of our stuff in, our nonprofit was running out of. We had 1 stop left from our tour. We had done maybe 7 stops at the time or 9 stops at the time. We had 1 left to go from Colorado to California, and literally just burned down in the middle of Utah on the side of the highway. And you go when you're on a highway.
It's like watching all your stuff.
Yeah. And so,
go on.
Look, I ended up being okay, and someone stopped. They got us to a rental car station an hour away, and we had a GoFundMe. People gave us money, and we got to California, and we got back home. When I came back home, like in August of 2016, what I was planning on doing, a living situation, was just kind of like completely in flux. I think that, like, the number one lesson in early adulthood really is to be able to roll with the punches. I think is absolutely key. So I went back to DC, and I got a place with an old college buddy. I thought, okay, I will build the startup from there. And it was sort of like recalibrating. And I think when I got to DC and I started building this thing, I was just totally stagnant. I think that entrepreneurship is really glamorized. And look, it's a nonprofit, so it was not pure entrepreneur, but it looks really sexy sometimes. But I'm 22. I'm working out of a WeWork, half mile down the street. I have no full-time employees. I have no one mentoring me. I have no one pushing me. I have no idea what I should be doing day to day. I have no playbook to kind of do some. So realistically, I'm spending a couple hours since WeWork a day slacking away at other people who are unpaid or partly paid. And I wasn't growing. And I could feel that too. It was really just slow for me. And I was trying my best, but I didn't feel like I was really going my full limits. I was getting antsy. And so about 6 months goes by, and this is March 2017 at this point. And I get a call from a group called Lacrosse Network that was owned by a large company called Whistle Sports saying, hey, we are hiring for a general manager role to run this. It's based in New York. We think you'd be a great fit to come interview. I took a trip up to New York and interviewed for this role. I knew nothing about media. Like I'd done some social content, but this was like a company that raised $50 million, Series B company, acquired Lacrosse Network, the biggest YouTube channel in sport. And they were asking me to come in and run it. And here I am running my little nonprofit. And they were like, you can still do this. And that can be part of what you're kind of doing. And you can kind of like learn media here in New York. And I said yes. I broke my lease in New York, went to DC and moved to New York. On a whim and joined there. And so my first job was a company called Lacrosse Network at Whistle Sports.
Did you feel prepared for that? Were you like ready to go? Were you like, I'm walking in day one, or was it a lot of imposter syndrome?
I mean, it wasn't even imposter syndrome. My arrogance was too large to have the imposter syndrome, and my ignorance was too large to realize I was a phony. I saw like the old boss guy Jeff Urban, who was like the head of sports marketing at Gatorade for years, like the heyday of it, and was president of the company. I saw him about a year ago this time in Chicago, and I was asking him what I was like when I was 23 in the company, and he was like, "Dude, when you first put together your content plan, you had like zero strategic chops. It was like Google Slides. It was like 10 slides, 3 sentences, absolute garbage budget, no plan, no audience study, nothing." It's funny, like at the end of the day, it worked. The business I inherited, I was blessed that people there already were a lot more talented and sharper than I am, in college Samir. So it made my job a little easier to start, but it grew from a low 6-figure business to a 7-figure business over the course of a year and a half, loosely, and it was doing really well. But yeah, I had no idea. So imposter syndrome, not it, kind of, but like part of it was just too ignorant to realize. And so you learn on the fly. I think that is, again, adaptability. You just sort of figure things out. And I just worked hard, I put time in, and I hired, the guy I worked with for years later on, RJ Kaminsky, who, what I learned quickly is if you just hire better than you look pretty good fast. And so I made 2 hires in him and George Shaparsky that made me look really good in that role. So it worked out pretty well.
RJ, definitely a great hire. We're not biased or anything, but we love that guy. And he's got, as we like to say on Elevation Nation, the best flow in the nation with his hair. So I love that. It sounds like this is a perfect transition then into what happened with the PLL, right? Do we want to talk a little bit about some of the next chapters there?
Sure thing. Look, I think one of the middle interludes in some ways. So the Lacrosse Network, our biggest partner was Paul Rabel. Paul's someone who I've known since I was 18. He came to the first Shootout for Soldiers. There's press clippings. I think it's kind of funny because, who Paul is today is incredible. He's built this whole business. He's well known for it. But the Paul I knew at the time was like mentoring me as an 18-year-old and stuck his neck out. And there was points in MLL too where I didn't want him to play or come to the event, and he supported it and it backed it literally from day one. And so I always felt indebted to him in some way too, because he had believed in me personally. And, while I was living in DC and then also while I was doing the Lacrosse Network, I helped launch a podcast with him called Shooting Up, where he kind of did this. He would interview athletes who were also entrepreneurs, and I would do some research and prep for him. How helpful I was, I doubt very much, but Paul is just so good at what he does that makes it easy. But it built that relationship up really well. And after being at TLN for about a year and a half or so and doing some work with him, and we had lots of the same sponsors like Warrior, New Balance, Red Bull. He's kind of told me what he was building at PLL, and I joined as full-time employee number 3, probably the first full-time hire on the content side. That was sort of October 2018. So helped press send on the first few tweets, Instagram posts for PLL for the first few years. It was kind of really cool to be a part of.
You're talking about all of these people who have like helped you get to where you are today, the people who you've worked alongside, the people you stood on the side of the road, watched your RV combust into flames. You keep bringing back to all these people, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts around like how much do you owe to the people that you've surrounded yourself with to allow you to get where you are today?
Oh, everything. I mean, that's not even a question. Like, I worked with Brett and RJ for years in Shootout for Soldiers, and Brendan Owens and Jerron Brooks too, which sort of made that possible, that I wouldn't nearly been able to do anything at Shootout there. And for Brett and RJ worked together later on as well, and Jerron stayed connected as well. So I think that's so critical. I think oftentimes when it comes to people and work, people are too transactional. It's like, what can you do for me now in the immediate? And it's just such a short-term way of thinking about it. And my general approach is like, be a good person. I think it's so simple, but like, as long as you don't screw anyone or look bad, like it's really helpful. And B is like, how do you provide more value than you're sort of capturing for yourself? But, I think all the time about, hey, these two people are great, they should be introduced. Or like, I know this person's raising a fund, or I know this person's looking to invest in something, he's this kind of person here. Or I know you just moved to LA and you know nobody, you should talk to my friend X, Y, and Z. And sometimes there's just no correlation by how you result from it, but like you're providing value to someone else. And true value. You're not just doing it because you want to do it. It's like, this is actually valuable to someone. And I think it's just being consistent too. Like I travel a lot. I live in LA. I just spend 40 days on the East Coast. I visit my friends. I call people. I text, and I'm there. And I think that's really relevant. And it's really easy in today's environment to think you're connected with someone because you see their Instagram stories. But if you don't put the effort into relationships, it's not really a relationship. And so I spent a lot of time working on that. And so people are so critical. And that's, to me at least, a resource or a value that compounds over time too, right? Like your best relationships with people can be more valuable as you grow older or as time goes on too. So I continue to do that as well.
To your point about transactional relationships, I think I want to hammer on that a little bit again for Elevation Nation that's listening, because we get a lot of young people that reach out to Parker and myself that say like, Sam, you have this insane network. Can you connect me with this person? Or how do I break into this industry? And while we are absolutely happy to do that, a lot of times people expect or think you owe them right away, right? And so I learned this lesson when I was, like you, Tyler, this like cocky new guy coming into a corporate world, not even realizing I was an imposter because I just thought I was the shit, right? You do all these clubs in school, you like get accepted into this cool job. And so I'll never forget, I set up a 30-minute coffee chat with this guy that was pretty high up at the company. And I went in and I was like, because I know how to talk, I'm like, hey, what's up, man? Like, this is me. I come out like guns a-blazing, high energy, trying to stand out. And he was like, listen, like, I love that you had like the balls to set this up, but what are you going to do for me? He's like, I'm giving you 30 minutes of my time. What are you going to do for me? Like, why should I help you? And while granted, that was a little aggressive and a little abrasive, it made me realize that I always want to try to provide value for other people that I meet with. And so I think if people kind of switch their mindset a little bit of be a good person, number one, but two, how can you help that person? How can you give back a little bit? How can you assist? The rest of the relationship or the favor that you're going to cash in will come later. But in the meantime, build that relationship on trust and giving and being a good person in the short term, and it'll pay dividends in the long term.
I'm sitting here, I'm like, you guys, I was an imposter like for the first 2 years after college. And you guys, yeah, like I walk into a meeting, I'm like, why am I here? Like, what do I bring to the freaking table? Like, these people around me are so much smarter than me. And I'm like, you guys, what are you eating for breakfast that allows you to just walk into a room and be like, you know what, I got this, and I'm not afraid what anyone thinks about. That took a while for me to get to. I will say that.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not always that way. There's definitely times where I've been imposter. I'm like, what am I doing here? And like, I transitioned to a new space and climate that I knew nothing about. And so I spent, I left PLL at the end of 2020, and I spent literally 9 months not working full time, just learning. Like, I was just reading a ton, having chats with people. And to the point of like, the reciprocal relation kind of stuff. There's tons of times I just chatted with somebody about climate and they were already in the industry or chief of staff, whatever it might be. I was just asking them questions because I was curious about things. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do regenerative agriculture or carbon removal or whatever. And people took the time to talk to me, and there was like a zero value add that I could provide to them, much as I tried. And so I have conversations probably twice a week now at this point of people who are like, hey, I'm in ed tech, I'm in health, I'm in government, I want to get into climate, how does it happen? And provide that too. So I think a lot of times people sort of like over-index on trying to make it a one-for-one, and I just tell folks just pay it forward and it'll go a long way because people did it for me. So yeah.
I think I've had a lot of conversations with young adults, a lot of people who are new out of college, and they're like, how do you network? Like, how do you go about these conversations? And Tyler, you say that you're talking, when you were trying to get into the climate space, you were reaching out to people. Do you literally just reach out to people that seem like interesting people that you want to meet, like on LinkedIn, or you text them through because you got the number from a friend? Or are you always going about like, this is someone that you know, or you're having someone introduce you? I think that would be really helpful for your Elevation Nation.
Look, in 2020, I probably did 5 kind of networkish events a week, getting into climate. And so
you would go to show up like,
well, at the time it was COVID, so it was remote stuff, but I would just do these Zooms or these like coffee chats and these kind of things. And I started going to these like hikes and things like that, meeting people. I think one-on-one's a lot of relationship, right? But when you're in a group of 20 people, it's a little different. And so what was valuable, what was important, it's tough to look back and know exactly, but I don't know, I had like a little Airtable spreadsheet and I would just go through these kind of things and I just showed up a lot of places. That's how I learned. I think that goes a long way. When I was in sports, it was a very similar thing too, where I would attend conferences or meetings with folks and spend that time. So I think putting in that face time is really important. I think that people expect they send a LinkedIn message to like a VP of marketing and say, I want to get into marketing. Like, what can I learn from you? I think that like the real value add would be like someone much younger, or saying like, hey, I noticed your company's not on TikTok. Here's 5 TikTok ideas I have for you. Or like, hey, I made some, like, look at this. There was one job where I literally just made a deck, even Pique, when I was working with Kip. I met him and like 2 days later, I sent him a deck of like 20 slides being like, here's how I think about your business. And like, this gets me so excited about what you're building and how I would get involved. I think he was kind of like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? But for me, it was just like immediately offering something. So yeah, I think it's helpful. Also, it's just like being a genuine person too. Like, I play cards, if I pick up hoops a lot, and like a lot of relationships come through like small things like that too. People can just vouch for you. I just feel like networking, I don't know. I'm not in love with the term. Like, I feel like it's like a little like chummy. I think it just feels too transactional to me. And it's like, I think there's a better way to approach it. My real food for thought is for people.
What's the word you call it?
Being a human?
No, yeah, I think it's like making networking. Friends. Maybe
I'm curious.
Like,
what do you think it is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I think like my approach.
I agree with you though.
If you want to get into a space or an industry, I think it's like, how do you show up at those conferences? How do you spend to attend places? How do you go to the happy hour things? How do you stuff people don't really want to go to, but like you can be supportive around? And that goes a long way. I volunteered in climate. Like I spent an hour every single week calling climate change makers. I just met people that way too. And so that wasn't networking. It was just like I'm building out my like relationships with folks in the space too, just so I had colleagues there.
It makes sense. I think there's a balance between that word networking. A lot of folks think it's robotic, and I think to your point, I mean, I will never forget this. Parker, quick story time. Parker and I went to represent the company we worked for, right? Big Four, accounting firm, consulting firm. We went back to Maryland to go to the career fair. And like, you want to talk about networking as the most awkward situation you've ever been in. These like young freshman or sophomore would come up and without even like being a normal person saying like, hey, what's up? How's it going? Or like, hey, I'm Sam. They would literally like death stare me in the eyes. Be like, hello, my name is Jared. I am a operations management sophomore from the University of Maryland. And I was like, whoa, chill out, dude. Like, I am a normal guy. And so to folks listening, I think Tyler's point on be a good person, a lot of your connections will come naturally. Insert yourself in the environment that you want to be in, where the people that you want to meet are hanging out, and it will come naturally. Like, do not try to force things. People want to build relationships with people. They don't want to build a LinkedIn connection with people. That part's easy. The relationship part takes more work. So
Totally.
I love that advice, Tyler. Thank you for digging into that. I do want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about Pique Action, right? So we had the lacrosse, we had Shootout for Soldiers, we had lacrosse in our veins. We went over to PLL. Paul Rabel believed in us, which one day Dream Guest will get Paul on here to talk about his story. And now we transition a little bit into climate change. I was a sustainability minor in college, so this is something I'm passionate about as well. But I'd love to hear a little bit about where that passion stemmed from for you.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it was like some sort of deep passion. I think like it'd be like fate sort of built it out. But I would say during 2020, I was doing a lot of soul searching as the pandemic was raging, and felt like, hey, the world is on fire, like literally and figuratively. And what am I doing about it? Sort of questioning myself. And my skill set is media and content. Like at PLL, I was making Instagram posts and tweets, and like that's not that relevant to people who are like decarbonizing the economy and unfucking the planet. And so I was really unsure where I can kind of go. But I felt like as I was learning about the space, I couldn't find great content. And so that was where kind of Pete came in, was that I was looking for someone who was thinking about content on climate solutions. When I say climate solutions, Pete's prerogative is, hey, we're trying to change the conversation on climate. No more floods and forest fires and polar bears playing on ice caps. Let's talk about solutions. And it's the opposite of doom scrolling is the approach. And that kind of came into short documentaries. I had met Kip, and I felt really excited about it because I was like, okay, this is the kind of content I want to consume. And I know I can kind of do there. And so I want to make more of this to kind of go. So I was really marrying sort of like my experience or skill sets with my curiosity around climate solutions and climate tech. I had a real inkling for regenerative agriculture and direct air capture and some of these really future technologies. But like I couldn't figure out where I fit in the mold. Was I a marketing person and do it at one company? I wasn't sure. Where media, I feel like I get to learn about so much that I don't know. I feel like I have the best job ever, for me at least personally, is because I spend all day just learning about cool solutions and talking to great people who are working to, fix the planet, and I get to amplify the work. I feel like that's just such a cool place to be in. It gets me really excited. So let me to Peak.
I can't imagine like how much introspection you had to go through to like make that transition. I mean, you were in a great role at the PLL, right? You're going into a whole new world away from lacrosse, something that has been ingrained in you for so long. Like, I feel like that introspection had to have taken days, if not weeks or months, to make that decision.
Yeah, man. Look, there's a book by Alain de Botton called Status Anxiety that I read that really flipped some things in my head. But it's uncomfortable. And one of the biggest things is like, how do you go from, in a funky way, like having status, right? You have a job, I work at a company, people respect you, they know you for this kind of thing, and then basically restart to zero and blow it all up. Forget even just not having a paycheck coming in, not having consistency, or in the middle of a pandemic. Like, there's a lot of other things that are, big holes here too that I was taking risk on. But in my mind, I was, 28 at the time, or 27 at the time, saying, hey, I want to spend the rest of my career. I love the sport of lacrosse. I enjoy playing it. PLL is a rocket ship. I mean, like, since I've left, the company is double or triple in size and is making money hand over fist. Seems like I'm having a lot of success. They're on ESPN now. But like, it's something that I want to be working on in the long term. And it wasn't it. So I was willing to kind of start from zero again on climate. Now, it's not full zero, obviously, but it largely is. And doing that. I made a map for myself where it was like, year one is going to be this, and I'm going to have to get used to making half of what I made salary-wise, and year two is going to be this. And after 3 years, if this is still like a failure, then maybe I'll revisit my decision. But I gave myself the space to rethink the decision. Now I'm done year two, and I far exceeded the marks I'd set for myself, so I feel pretty good with it. But the time I'd set some parameters, I was like, all right, I'm going to do this, and if for 3 years I'm still not cracking it through, then I'll rethink what I'm kind of doing here.
So we're talking like a real roadmap, like an actual map. You can put it on a desk. You can see it. Where's Tyler here in year 1? Where's Tyler here in year 2? Where in year 3? Right?
Totally.
It's not just in your head. You're writing this stuff down.
It's not saying where I will necessarily be. It's saying like, what are the look? Every decision you have, there's 2 types of decisions, right? There's ones that you can never reverse, the ones you can walk back in that door to. And so, I thought for my decision to leave PLL and to go into climate, it's a very reversible decision, right? If in 3 years, in the year 2023, I decide, hey, I want to get back into sports, so lacrosse, whatever. I know these friends, I know the sport well, I have other connections, whether it's at PLL or somewhere else in sports, I feel comfortable there. And so it gives you the like sanity that like your whole world isn't going to end. I write a lot of lists in my journal a ton too, so I can check my thinking along the ways too. We have like a total, our brains are wired this way too, that we like justify these things, how we made things in the past. And we sort of like shape the story from like start to finish for where we are now, but in reality has much different kind of points that's there. The final thing, I ripped this from like reading one of the Jeff Bezos' biographies, blanking on the name, the Everything Store, the one after. It talks about like maximizing your luck surface area. And I felt like I had to rip the Band-Aid off and leave PLL full time. So I wanted to jump into climate. I had to be able to have like more opportunistic sort of conversations or chances or have more free time to do it. I couldn't do it on the side. You know, when I tell people they're building a startup, I always recommend you do it slowly on the side so you have some consistency, so you're not trying to turn on revenue right away. That's how the Warby Parker folks did it. I think it's a prime example. For my own personal life and career, I feel like doing it on the side would make me almost never jump in fully because I always had the safety net of it. Whereas if I gave myself a 3-year window and said, hey, if this is bad, I can always go back, it makes it a lot easier. Now, I definitely know I'm not going back now. I feel very happy with the decision. But that's kind of like how the frameworks I built in my head, at least. Also, one last thing, too, I would say, on career side. Sorry to cut you off there, Sam. I rebuilt my life not about work in 2021. So I did it as like health, self, climate, career. And I thought it was, how do I just like begin with my personal health? I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't working out well. I meditated for 400, 500 days straight at one point. I was journaling a ton. I went to therapy, things I hadn't done before. I mean, man, I wish someone had told me years ago to fucking go to therapy, sign up for BetterHelp, and Talkspace. And there's just like things I hadn't done before. And I started 2021 saying I'm going to rebuild myself first, and my career and climate was second. And that was really important too. So I don't know, for folks who are considering the kind of transitions, I would sort of do an audit of yourself first before doing an audit of your career sometimes.
I appreciate all that insight because not only do we get a lot of questions from young people saying, how do I start off in this thing we call life as an adult? But as Parker and I have gotten a little bit older and we now are, late 20s, not even mid 20s anymore. It's, well, how do I rebuild myself? How do I reposition myself? How do I pivot? I can't do that. I'm an expert in this, or I have 4 years experience in this. I have all my career connections in this. I can't pivot. I can't change. And I don't necessarily have the answer because I would be hypocritical if I said I knew how to do it because I've been in the same job essentially since I started. And so hearing how you did it, I think is really beneficial, not only for Elevation Nation, but for myself too, as we start to look at, who we really are and what we really want and what we care about. Sometimes we do need to step back and be introspective and have those deep conversations with ourselves. And it brings up a topic that I'd love to hit on quickly, which is something Parker and I absolutely love at Elevation Nation, which is this concept called mental fortitude. So when Parker and I were going through some of our hard times, we locked ourselves in Ocean City, Maryland for a full week with sticky notes and tried to figure out like what was the missing piece in our lives. And we came to the conclusion that mental fortitude was something that was really important. And we broke that down into 3 pieces: self-awareness, knowing who you are; vision, where you want to go; and accountability. And so why I'm bringing this up now is you talk, Tyler, about taking the time to rebuild your life, come up with this roadmap, take a step back, be introspective, go to therapy. Those are all actions that you took, in my opinion, to figure out who you were, figure out where you wanted to go, and figure out how you were going to hold yourself accountable. So for folks out there listening on Elevation Nation, take just one step. You're not going to be able to do all that at once. It's not going to happen overnight. As you heard, Tyler took a long time to do this. So have some grace with yourself, be patient, and just take that first step to start to that new path that you potentially might go on.
Tyler, I think that was very well said, Sammy, by the way. I just want to tell you that. But it's just like really, really cool to hear how you broke it down. Like, you know, I look at you, obviously, you know, way back, you know, we worked on student government together, saw you doing all these amazing things, you know, both in high school, college, and then after college. And like, I always thought that you were someone I wanted, you know, looked up to, and like I wanted to be in a position that you were in, doing amazing things, going after your dreams and whatnot. But I always tied your success to the job that you were doing. So hearing you break down that, you know, in 2021, it was all about rebuilding yourself and putting the job second is like amazing and incredible. And I think Elevation Nation can learn a lot from that, is that you got Tyler, someone who's elevated and continue to elevate and continue to elevate. And you know what? He's elevating even more because he's gotten to a point where he's put the job aside and he's focusing on the real things that matter to him.
Yeah,
you know,
man,
not that the job doesn't matter a lot, but like
100%. I mean, like I talk about this in therapy too, and I go through it and I work on this myself, where not my value is not my work. It's not my work product. It's not my career. It's not my status. It's not my title. And I think that you're sometimes trained from society to have some of those feelings too. And as someone who was a high achieving person, a young person too, you like keep seeking that because you keep getting positive feedback. This is great stuff. But like my friends don't love me because I'd started a business. My friends love me because we hang out, we have fun times together, and so.
Or they're the wrong friends if they don't.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's true. And you figure out who are those wrong friends, or maybe who are those fake friends. Everyone kind of say it too there as well, and that happens as well. When I jumped from lacrosse to climate, I figured out, hey, it was just kind of like talking to me because I was in lacrosse. I could help them out with their own career in the sport. So, yeah, like these are like real things to wrestle with. I really I read a few of his books, Alain de Botton. He has something called The School of Life. I highly recommend it. He's got a few card games too that I always play with people, and they're so annoyed with me too. But I find it really helpful that I recommend people playing with. It's a lot of like self-introspective work that goes a long way.
And it's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight. You know, it takes a while to figure out.
Yeah, I think it's about consistency, honestly. If you do something every day for 50, 100 days too, the practice becomes more common. And so every day I journaled, and every day I meditated, and every day I walked my dog and thought about these kind of things. It just created some patterns that become like identity to you. It's like James Clear's classic thing on Atomic Habits, right? It's like kind of habit stack these things, and then those habits become your identity. And yeah, man, like that was the I was doing that. And look, I've broken some of those things, and like I become a little more fragile here, but yeah, I think that's my advice to some folks too, is just to kind of do it consistently and start small, and it'll go a long way.
Listen, we're all human. It's not all perfect. There's going to be ups and downs and everything in between. But Tyler, you know, we're going 48 minutes. We still got we got two more sections, you know, real quick. We got the rapid fire questions. We hope that these questions are rapid fire. Sometimes they turn into long-winded questions, but we got three questions for you. My first one is, how do you think young adults view climate change? Not very rapid, by the way.
I think that they're stressed and anxious about it, or they're not thinking about it at all. And so it's one of those two boats. I think that if you're not thinking about it, you're not either realizing the opportunity or the effects it has on your life, your job in the future. But you see that with like increased hurricane risk or crop failures or places like that too. So if you're not thinking about, you know, sort of like the changes to our world, you probably got your head in your sand. If you are, you're probably a little anxious about it. So that's probably how I'm thinking about it.
I most certainly am in the anxious camp. So, Tyler, I'm going to have to start following Pique Action and not doom scrolling, and you guys inspiring me a little bit more. But I might have to use you as a therapist when I'm going through a hard time of like, God damn, where are we going? What are we doing, Earth? But I digress. Okay, thank you for that. Next thing, like I said, I'm a Chicago boy. We didn't really have lacrosse going up. I played basketball. I would love to know, Tyler, what is your favorite thing about lacrosse? What makes lacrosse beautiful and such a passion for you?
I think one is like a sport itself. I think it's like this kind of like mix of creativity and athleticism, and it's like you don't have to be the fastest or strongest or toughest guy. It's kind of beautiful as like the larger zooming out. I think it's like a community standpoint. Lacrosse is an indigenous sport, right? It has roots with the Iroquois, and so it's the little brother of war, and it's the medicine game. And so if you think about those two things, how different those things are, right? That it's like it was training for war, and it was also to heal people as well in societies and people who are sick. I think that's like the beauty of the sport, and so the community element of lacrosse I really love. So yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. Big fan of lacrosse. I mean, how could it not be going to BL? I feel like everyone loves lacrosse, regardless if you play it or not. All right, we've talked a lot about books, Tyler. We ask every guest who comes on Elevation Nation. I've bought a lot of books because of the amount of conversations that we've had on Elevation Nation. But what is one book that you maybe didn't recommend to Elevation Nation that you would recommend, or something that you're reading now? One book.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I mean, I mentioned status anxiety. I think like a great one is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. I think a lot of young men should read that too. It's about the power of vulnerability. And I'm doing a quick scan if there's anything else that jumps out to me. Man, I really love this book, The Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's sci-fi. It's a little different. But man, it was such a great listen, and a little bit different. But yeah, I think Daring Greatly and Status Anxiety are two great ones for like self-work. They can go a long way.
Did I hear you say listen? Do you listen to books and read?
Oh yeah, I walk my dog. I've got a 70-pound pit bull I adopted when I was in college named Callie, and so we do walks in the morning and the evening, and that's what I go do after this podcast. And I listen a lot more. It's different types of book that I listen to lead, but like I actually like listening more. I think I get through it faster. I absorb it, and like I really know I know something when I can teach someone something, and so when I listen to it, I can sort of practice or talking it back as well.
Respect that.
I love it. Parker now is going broke every time we have a podcast.
It's like $20, Amazon.
Just keeps getting books.
It's funny, my girlfriend, Tyler, we live in New York City. We got not the biggest apartment. Our shelf, our windowsill has become my bookshelf. And so slowly, because of the podcast, there is no windowsill anymore. It's just all books. And I think I'm very much in the market for a real bookshelf.
I would look at two things. I would say Libby is an app that you can listen to books for free from your public library, so it can save you some money there.
Fair enough.
I think that's an easy one. There's a bunch of little hacks like that. Obviously, you can have a public library membership. And like books are meant to be read. So lately, I've been reading and gifting people books, and so it's not about having it on my bookshelf, but it's like, hey, let's book swap or something. It goes a long way too. So. Food for thought.
Totally.
I use Libby and I read on the Kindle, and Parker and I get into debates all the time, but we won't open up
the physical book because I can also give it to someone.
I know. I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying that it's nice to not have books everywhere.
That's true.
That's all I'm saying.
As I'm looking at like 4 books.
Quite the debate in the Elevation Nation household.
Oh, look, I've got fridge books too.
All right, Tyler. Exactly.
They look good, right?
They look good. This has been incredible. I want to bring us to our last segment, which is, our personal favorite, the mental motto. We've asked every single guest that have come on and joined Elevation Nation, joined our community, what is a phrase that they live by? And they've all been so different and they've all been so impactful. So we want to ask you, what is your mental motto?
I hope RJ didn't say the same one, but for me, it's BTJ, bring the juice. That's like life rule number one for me. So the other one that I really liked was The Obstacle is the Way. It's like a classic Ryan Holiday book. If you haven't read his stuff before, I highly recommend it. But that's a reminder to me. The Obstacle is the Way is like, hey, you have to go through tough times to have like any sort of achievement or gain. Bring the juice, reminder, bring energy. And my favorite, I keep telling myself on the weekends, is mixing the water. Just a good reminder as well to myself personally. But I gave you 3. Yes,
Bring the juice,
so
but mix in the water.
Yeah,
What was the other one?
All
the
beverage
obstacle
related
away.
motto.
Yeah, BTJ has got to be it. My friends have heard me say that so many times. And so
Sounds
I
like
love
a tattoo
that.
that might need to be.
I've
Or a
come
shirt
dangerously
or a
close.
hat.
Yeah,
You know, there's got to be some apparel, some way you can wear that and own it.
that's true.
Tyler, I mean, we're 55 minutes into this. It's been a hell of a conversation. You know, I hyped you up to Sam. I will say, I hyped you up. You know, Sam sometimes finds some guests. I find some guests. I'm like, Tyler has been on my list since the day we started this thing in October 2020. And it was just, you know, we're going to wait, figure it out, how to, you know, navigate a nice little conversation. Obviously, we had your roommate on first, so he gets a little bragging rights. But this conversation was amazing. And it's amazing to hear all the cool things that you're up to, how you're making a difference in the world in a new way. And it's super inspiring to hear how you've gone about, especially that year where you took time for yourself to really, you know, find that new path. So I respect the hell out of you, and hopefully, just hopefully, we're having a beer when the Ravens are in town and you're in town, and hopefully they're not losing in the fourth quarter with like 10 seconds left.
I look forward to that. Thank you for having me on. Sam, nice to meet you as well. Great questions, great conversation too, and yeah, appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Elevation Nation, until next week. Peace. Thank you, Tyler. That was